it as tight as possible. But as you know, Lori, most of these journeys are not linear in fashion. And so, what we think is a couple small steps to an end turn out to be a whole bunch of pinball games. And so that's been a bit of my journey. I always joke with this question that I'm living proof you can choose the wrong major and survive in college. And hopefully that takes a little pressure off of many who are trying to make that decision. I was an accounting major in college, and nothing wrong with that major at all. It just wasn't a great fit for me. And I went ahead and continued for 4 years and graduated with that degree, and went to work as an auditor for the state of Ohio, which is where I grew up, and did that for 2 years, and it nearly killed me because it's not who I am.
No.
As an auditor, you're basically relaying bad information all day long to people. And I'm harmonious. So if anybody's taken StrengthsFinder on here, probably most of you, my top strength is harmony, which is not a great talent for an auditor. At least you don't use it very often. And I also like challenge. I get bored with routine very quickly. And as an auditor, that's what you do, is the same process over and over and over again. So I did that for 2 years and tried to push my way through it, and finally realized that life's too long to push all your entire career. And so I like numbers. I knew I was close, and I remembered back to a couple finance classes I had and really enjoyed those. I love the decision-making part of numbers, like answering the so what question. It's not about the number, it's about what do you do with it, and how can you make a decision based off this information. And so that led me back to school. I went to Ohio State and did my MBA there in corporate finance, and spent a couple years there. And while I was there, I started to feel the call to teach. I loved education. I loved this middle ground between practitioner, industry, and education. I probably couldn't have articulated at that time, but that's what was happening in me at that point in time. And so after I graduated from there, I went to Texas Tech University. Had never been to Texas before, and sight unseen took off there because at that point in time, they had the only CFP registered PhD program in the country. And so I went there and spent 3 years out in West Texas in Lubbock. If you've not been there, you probably won't go there. It's out in the middle of literally nowhere in the panhandle of Texas. Spent 3 years there, and since then it's been some education and some blending of practitioner-oriented work. I spent about 10 years as a traditional professor educator, and then during the last 5 or 6 years have really expanded that to get into that sweet spot of working with industry. First in the corporate finance setting, I worked with a company called Evanta for a while here in Portland, and did some professional development work, and we developed some online training programs that were designed for frontline and mid-level leaders around the country, and got to work with a lot of chief executives, Fortune 500 companies, and that was a ton of fun. And then I know we're going to talk mainly about financial planning here. That's been about the last 3 years of work, has been starting a program here, and then really doing the legwork of connecting with industry partners in Portland and beyond. And I currently hold a position at a company called Human Investing in Portland. They're a medium-sized registered investment advisor. They manage about $1.5 billion of assets, and I serve as their director of planning practices and research. So that's about as tight as I can make it. I'll stop there.
No, that's good. That's good. But, I'm going to walk you back a little bit, because you made a comment that I'm not sure the folks on the call might understand yet, given where they're at in their early career. And you said it was a push, and I didn't want to push my career my whole life. Can you talk about that, what that means, so folks know?
Yeah, I think it's a general feeling that for everyone shows up in different ways. For me, it really showed up as dread. Lori, as the weekend would go on, I would get more and more fatigued just thinking about starting again on Monday. And that's not a great feeling. I was constantly bumping up against my constraints, things that I'm not as proficient as. I also wasn't able to really live out and employ those greatest gifts. And so I was tired a lot. I was thinking a lot about it. I found myself depleted. It's much like if you think about like an introvert, which I am, and there are some on the call who are, you can function in an extroverted world, but it wears you out very quickly and you need time to recover. And that's kind of what it was for me.
Right.
But I think I realized that life has to be more abundant than that. That you should. There's so many things that you can be doing, and I started to see some of those things. But it takes courage, especially for a personality that's diverse, to leave something that's guaranteed and sure, to take an opportunity that who knows how it may turn out or whether it's going to turn out.
Right. So really comes from pushing a rock uphill, right? Just the work wasn't fun. It was just too hard, etc. All right. Great. Okay. So now we've heard kind of where you started and how you got into this field. When you look back on as early as your college years or in your development years, what are some of the experiences that just really hit home for you? And to this day, you can remember them, and whether it was a dang it, if I knew then what I know now type of thing, or just however it hit you, what would you say are some key experiences that still have meaning to you?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple of these. I think the first one that's the most stark is that, I mean, I was just really ignorant. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think that's probably a lot of us. We just head out and then we realize how much we don't know. And I remember starting out, I had this degree. I went to a Christian liberal arts university, much like Fox. And so I think I share a rather similar undergraduate experience. And my faith was important to me. It still is. And when I graduated, I remember I started this job. I had a business degree. And I remember it had to be the first 2 weeks on the job that somebody said, why? I mean, imagine their face like kind of snarled up. It was a very directed question. It was like, why business? Why of all professions would you choose business? Why not something that actually helps people? This was the quote, something like nursing or like a psychologist or like a teacher. Why business? And I have to tell you, I fell flat on my face on that question. I didn't have an answer. And it was kind of an embarrassing moment of realizing that you're in a place that you can't put words to why you're actually in this place and how it does better humanity and how it does have purpose beyond a paycheck. And so it sent me kind of on a spiral and an exploration to be able to have a narrative, to have words to describe that. And there were a couple books I read, one called Business Through the Eyes of Faith, another one called Business as a Calling. And it was this discovery for myself to try to figure out what I was trying to do and how life had to have more purpose than just that. And so that was one key event that happened very quickly into my work world. I think another was just mentors. When I think back to that time, particularly in college, I don't remember much of what I learned, to be honest, hardly anything. I couldn't even tell you what classes or, those kinds of things. I'm assuming there was some learning that took place, but most of that happens on the job, as you know, and in life. But what I do remember is the mentors that were in my life and the conversations and the people. And I think many of us probably on the call, that will be our story 5, 10, 20 years from now is, you'll remember those people that exhibited qualities that you want to exhibit. And that was it for me. It was less probably about a career, and it was more about who is the professional and who is the person that I want to be. And, the danger there is trying not to become someone else, but to exhibit the good qualities of those people that you most admire and gather their wisdom and learning from them. So those were probably two of the things that stand out the most for me when I think about those most developmental times.
Yeah, I would have to say, I totally agree with you. I would have to say I've also run into some folks that were an interesting type of mentor in that I didn't want to be anything like them, right?
Right.
There were people that I just thought, how do they go home and look at themselves in the mirror? They were unbelievably mean, I call them mean-spirited, and just didn't have a positive, helpful, nice bone in their body, I swear, right? So, I mean, I'm
Yep.
with you. People tend to mold us, and it's meeting all kinds that take us down our path.
Yeah, you know, Lori, one other thing I thought of with that reminded me of, and I think this was a painful lesson for me, but
Is
it's
it when
probably
you
been
got
one
to know
that's
me?
unlocked the most. What's that?
Is it when you got to know me?
No, it was way before that. You're number 2 or 3 on the list.
Okay.
You're in the mentor category, actually. Um, for me, I think it was recognizing my constraints and being able to use those to really channel what I'm not going to do. I mean, even what you find out is there are a million things that you could do, and you could actually do them. There are a lot of things we could do and be mediocre at. And for me, a lot of the unlocking for me became looking at and saying, what am I not going to do? And you learn that quickly, right? As you start to run into these things, it's like, well, I'm not as proficient in that area as I thought I was. Or there are a lot of people that are way more gifted in this certain area. And what our natural tendency is, I think, is to try to get better at that. Competition is my number 2 strength. And so, you know, if I have a challenge in front of me, I'm just going to try to get better and beat someone at it. And what I realize is that's kind of a fruitless endeavor, because you'll just be doing that your entire career, entire life. And so it was more about recognizing what I wasn't going to do to be able to unlock me to the things that I am going to do. And I think that's one of the greatest takeaways that comes from, say, like a strengths finder, is the natural tendency is to start thinking about the things we don't have and how do we get those, instead of saying, you know, maybe I'll never have those. I'm not going to be a woo. You know, I'm not going to be this command person, but I do have these other things working for me. And so if I let go of these other things and really lean into the things that I have the greatest ability to use and maximize, it really helps. So that's another one I thought of when you mentioned that last comment.
That's an awesome one. And we do that so many times in our life. And then we get to this big decision of what do I want to be when I grow up kind of question. And we think, what do I want to do? But you've made a really good point. And we've got 70 folks on this call right now. And I want everyone to think of that nugget, that a lot of times it's easier, instead of looking at like which one of these outfits I'm going to wear, and you've got 20 in front of you, you start jettisoning ones the way they say, well, I know that color doesn't look good on me, or I know that's just not going to fit the occasion. So great point. You know, don't always look at what you're running to. Sometimes look at what isn't a good fit, and it would be fruitless for you to run in that direction. So Emily, I think you've got a question as well, and you wanted to give everyone a reminder.
Yes, everyone, if you're just like, it's totally okay to ask questions, but when you're not speaking, just remember to mute your microphone so we're not hearing the background noise. And then can everyone remember to sign in to the group chat for your attendance points, please? Lori, I can ask my question now?
You betcha.
Oh, good. Ryan, one of the probably most memorable quotes that you gave my class when I was in Intro to Business was that every class period is a job interview. And we talked about this, I think, right before we all left from school. But can you just explain that to the class and kind of elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, that's another life lessons learned, and often the painful way. You know, and it's a fine line between that recognition, Emily, and what I would consider kind of paranoia. You know, and that is, I mean, the leadership lesson is you're being watched always. And that's not like in a, you know, creepy kind of way. It's in a way of like, you know, employers want to know way more who you are than what you can do. They're going to teach you stuff. And, you know, sometimes they'll even pick people that don't know certain things because they don't want to have to recoil and, you know, uncoil from the way they've learned it so that they can teach them their way. They want more of a fresh canvas, but they do want these character qualities. And those can be asked in an interview, but they're most powerfully garnered through observation. And, you know, it's a hard lesson of life to realize that, and I applied this to the classroom because, I mean, I think that's true as well. I mean, just to be real honest with you, I'll have students a lot of times ask me to write a recommendation letter, or we're in closed conversations with faculty deciding on who gets a scholarship or who gets recognized. And immediately it has no bias in it other than observation, but I'm immediately going to go back to those data points that I have, those observations, like, where did you sit in class, and did you pay attention, and did you exhibit integrity, and all of these personal qualities and characteristics that employers would be looking for, or faculty would be looking for, or you name it. But I think the lesson there is to just have a healthy awareness that you're being watched. And I can give you a great example of that. When I was at Evanta, it's downtown Portland, it's in the Coin Building right downtown, and I was there one afternoon. I was working, and I was in the bathroom, and I had come out of the bathroom, and I saw that there was a paper towel that was on the floor of the bathroom, the hallway between the bathroom and the office. And I saw this guy that I knew. He was a worker, very, very entry-level worker, and he picked up the paper towel on the way in. It wasn't his. He didn't have to pick up that paper towel. He picked it up because it was out of place, and I think he ascribed to this idea of not walking past a mistake. So he picked it up and he threw it away. Well, little did he know the CEO of the company was behind him. He had no idea. Later that afternoon, about 30 minutes later, this gentleman was promoted. It had nothing to do with his abilities on the job. It had everything to do with the kind of person that this CEO wanted to be in a leadership responsibility. And so, that was a lesson powerfully of you're being watched, whether you're actually being watched by a CEO behind you, or whether you're creating this canvas that's going to exhibit some painting at some point when somebody's making a decision.
That's great. All right, so many times in business, I say it, a lot of folks say it, find a need, fill a need, right? If you're looking for a place to be important, a place to be special, find a need, fill a need. And that's going to keep you in business longer than those that don't pay attention to what the market's saying. So whether folks here or not know, you've done something very interesting at George Fox. And for as long as I've known you, you've always found these needs and looked for ways to fill them. But you recognize that financial planning was becoming a huge opportunity in the general marketplace. Not only were people flocking to it as a job opportunity, but people are flocking to it as I want to have better decisions made for my money, and thus the snowball gets bigger and bigger. So you propose to Robin Baker and others on the board, this is something we should do. Not everybody's playing in this space. It's going to be special to us. We should do this. But it was far from easy. Could you just share with people, what a great idea can still be a very difficult idea to get through the mill. Can you just talk to people kind of what were the roadblocks? What kind of things did you need to do? And where is it at now? I mean, I'm sure you're happy with where you're at, but share that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think the biggest lesson I learned, Lorian, is that a great idea is only a great idea if it happens at the right time. So sometimes you can have a great idea and you have to sit on it. And for my instance, my case, I had to sit on it for 11 years. I graduated from Texas Tech in 2005 with this degree in financial planning. And I never taught financial planning, was never in a program, never proposed it until 2016, so 2005 to 2016. And the reason why is it just wasn't the right timing. And so sometimes you have to patiently wait for your opportunity to be able to strike. And I think that's a great lesson for students is, just because you have a great idea doesn't mean you run to your supervisor and propose it that day. You have to have the EQ to be able to be aware of, today's market is probably not a good time to bring up your next idea. Sit on it for a while, develop it, wait until the clouds blow over and look for your opportunity to be able to do that. To answer your question, I think more directly is, I was waiting for a couple things to happen. One is financial planning has been a profession historically that planners have moved into as a third, fourth, fifth career option. And so, a lot of financial planners historically have been, say, criminal justice majors or youth ministry majors or psychology majors. who worked in various jobs for, 10, 15, 20 years, and then realized the grind was heavy. There had to be a better way to make a living, particularly as they had a family, but they still wanted to help people. And so they realized there were ways to make money in helping people that may have been a little more conducive to living a more of a balanced life in that area. But what it meant is that college students weren't the target audience for a financial planning degree. These individuals were coming out of industry and into it. So a lot of the programs were online, they were certificate programs. And so you've got that piece in the equation. Another is that you just had, there weren't many people that were hiring financial planners that were younger because they didn't have a career path for the 23-year-old financial planner. They had somebody stepping into more of a partner role that needed to look more like a partner. For a lack of better expressions, they needed to have some gray hair and look like they had been around the block a few times before people were going to trust them to manage their money. And again, most 23-year-olds don't exhibit that no matter how proficient they are in their competency. So there were a couple other more serendipitous things that had happened that were more timing, but I was pretty convinced that we needed to move. I had started to form an alliance with a couple organizations that were more on the East Coast, and realized that most of the efforts that were starting were all East Coast oriented. They were in the Virginia area, they were in Ohio, they were in Indiana. There was really nothing west of the Mississippi. And if you looked at a map, you realize there's a lot of territory west of the Mississippi. And so I felt like we were really positioned well to be able to take advantage of that. Plus, there was a big movement towards faith-based financial planning of even people who didn't have faith, certainly didn't have a Christian faith, were really interested in more transcendent biblical principles, just wisdom when it came to their money. And there was some movement in that direction as well. So I recognized there was only one program, and there still is only one residential CFP program in all of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. That's Central Washington University is the only other program that has a residential program. There are only two faith-based programs on all of the West Coast, west of the Mississippi. Two of them are in the LA area, and one is us. So I don't have a marketing degree or much competency in that area, but I didn't need you to tell me that the market was pretty ripe for something like this. But your question reveals that just because you've got a great idea doesn't mean that it's going to stand on its own. Sometimes you have to do a lot of convincing, a lot of framing, a lot of educating, and be patient along the way. The major roadblocks I had, Lori, were ones of, I think, misunderstanding. I've been so familiar with this industry as it's evolved that I had an idea and I was operating from the idea of this new model, but many of the people that you're trying to convince still have the old paradigm in mind. And so I remember directly when I took it to the board and some stakeholders in the president's cabinet, there were three resistance points that they brought up. And the points were, isn't this a dying profession? That was one question. Wow. Don't robots already do all that stuff? That was the second question. And the third observation was, who's going to hire a 23-year-old financial planner to manage their money? Right. So those were the 3 points. And, that's when you have a decision. I mean, initially you just I wanted to kind of act out in defense and be like, are you ignorant? Right. Do you not know? But that's obviously not a way to persuade or influence people. I realized that it had to do more with misinformation. And so education was going to be the way to win the day. And that's what it took. So it took a little bit of education to say, I think we're talking about different things here. If you're talking about a dying profession, you're talking about a traditional insurance agent or a stockbroker. And if that's what you're talking about, you're correct. Those are dying professions. But if you're talking about comprehensive financial planning, it's actually a very new profession that's being developed. And that's what I'm talking about. Don't robots already do all that stuff? Well, define that stuff. If you're talking about asset allocation, like how to build a portfolio, yes, robots are doing that. And that's not where you want to be right now. That's why stockbrokers don't exist anymore, because robots already do all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. wealth management is just a small piece of comprehensive financial planning. And then the other one, who would hire a 23-year-old? Well, the same people that would hire a 23-year-old accountant are the people that are now hiring 23-year-old financial planners. The industry's changed and career paths have opened up. The name paraplanner or junior planner, those positions have been created for the 23-year-old financial planner that they can pay a third of what they would pay somebody more seasoned to do a lot of the work that sets them up for success. And so those were the roadblocks that I experienced. And what I learned from that again was that sometimes education is what you need to do in order to uncover some of those roadblocks. That they're only resistant because they're acting off different information.
Right. So let's paint that picture for everybody on this call then. What is the job description, and what kind of people would have the right personality to flock to this job? And is there any money to be made?
Yeah, I love this question because there's a lot of innocent misconception around this idea. Anytime somebody hears the word, I think, finance in anything, most of us shut down because we think math, we think numbers, we think spreadsheets. You got to be really good with this. You got to be an accountant. That couldn't be any further from the truth when it comes to financial planner. The best definition I've ever heard, I think, of financial planning is you get a chance to hear people's stories. You get a chance to help them by helping them, reach the things that are the most meaningful for them in life, and you can make a great living doing it. And that's not overstated as far as what we do as financial planners. I bet, I don't know what the number is here, but I don't think it's far off when I say 80-85% of what we do is interpersonal. So it's sitting down like this. It's, having the skills to be able to create a connection, to be able to ask good questions and to listen intently, to be able to ask follow-up questions, and then to be able to join beside someone and really behaviorally coach them towards these alternatives, to be able to identify them and then lead to them. The finance piece is really just the fact that the domain we work in has to do with the money domain of life. But you might be surprised how many times things start out as a money conversation and they turn into just life situations. And that's probably most of the time that money is the most direct unlocking mechanism to conversations about their fears. They'll start talking about their fears of, it starts out as a college funding conversation, which is a money conversation. And then it turns out to hoping their child chooses this particular school because this is what they want for them. And, now they're in a completely different conversation about life. And, I get calls from people all the time that I wonder, what did that have to do with money? It has nothing to do with money. What it has to do with is being a trusted advisor, a trusted source in their life. And it's just, I think an ability to run something by someone, to check wisdom with it. And so, as far as what you have to answer your question, I always start out with what you don't have to have first. And that is a very proficient math background. It doesn't take 2-3 levels of calculus to be able to do this. It doesn't take a high level of technical competence in running algorithms and mathematical models and, doing scenario and sensitivity analysis. Software does all of that stuff for you. What you have to have is you can't be intimidated by numbers. So if you shut down at the very thought of a number, that's probably not a great profession because you do have to look at numbers. But more of what you have to do is be able to communicate what that number actually means, and then have the understanding of how behaviors of how humans are responding to that information and how you can come alongside them and coach them towards some of these alternatives. So I think we're more of a counselor than we are financial people most of the time. And I have found we're early on, Lori, into the program. We're just starting our 3rd cohort next year. But I have found that those that are most proficient are the ones that actually came out of helping professions. So, they thought they were, gearing up to be a psychology major, or again, a youth ministry major, or, sociology major. And they didn't realize that there was actually an ability to kind of channel that helping function or that helping motive into this area.
Yeah, I'm with you. I could even see somebody that wants to go into sales fitting here because I'm with you. I'm on the other side of the coin. I have an amazing financial planner that I've been with for a long, long time. And I think of them as my friend. Not that we're literally friends, but you're talking about some very sensitive, heartfelt, personal information. You know, whether it is the pure finance question or whether it's the hopes and dreams you have for your children or for retirement. So
Yeah.
having that relationship, it's got to be somebody that's intuitive to liking to be with people.
Yeah, I remember being out, to give you another illustration, it was last summer. I was out golfing during the summer and got a phone call from a client. And, you know, anytime you get a phone call, you're trying to feel out, like, what's the purpose for this phone call? How can I step into this space? And this question kept going on, this conversation, and it was about this particular client was talking about his mother, and was talking about, you know, potentially moving her into an independent living facility, and kept going on and on. And I was listening for the financial hook. It's like, all right, what he's going to finally ask me, like, should I do this or this? Or what's the Medicare question that's involved here? Or are we talking about a special needs trust? You know, what is the financial planning issue? And there was no financial planning issue. What he wanted finally at the end was, what do you think? And I was like, what do you think about what? Like, what do you want? What do you think I should do with mom?
Chicken or
fish? It's like,
wow,
that's what he really wanted to know, is what you just said is, you know, I've trusted you for, you know, years and years and years with stuff. You know, there's this axiom that I think is true, and it's sad, but, you know, we often find that people in relationship will tell their financial planner stuff they wouldn't think about telling their spouse. And that, again, I'm not promoting that. That's not good for a relationship, but it is truth. That a lot of times you treat this objective person that you have no real emotional attachment to, into information. You invite them in. And so, you know, it's probably the thing that energizes me the most, Lori, is listening to some of these deep life purposes, fears, hopes, goals, you know, things that people want to accomplish, and then stepping alongside of them and doing what seems like very trivial little things that actually unlock them into that potential.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear you say that, because in a way, it's one of the few professions where you are actually partnering with people.
Absolutely. Yep.
Versus doing a job. So
Yep.
Brennan has a question for you. What has been the biggest challenge you've faced as a financial planner?
The biggest challenge. My biggest challenge is what happens when, there's this interesting paradigm that happens when you're a financial planner. And it is that you realize that the people you're helping, you have no control over. And so the relationship is designed so that you're giving advice to individuals based on their situation, and then you're trusting them to follow through on that information. And so, you know, there's this element of my values and my client's values, and it's really hard to keep your own values out of a situation. And I don't mean doing something that's unethical or against your values. I just mean, like, when it comes to money, all of us have values, things that are important to you. If you were to look at a budget and cut out 20% of it, you would cut things that would be different than what I would cut, just because our values are different. And that doesn't make it bad or good. It's just different. And so you have to realize that it's not about you as a planner. It's about the client. You're working on behalf of them. But then, I mean, to answer Brennan's question, the hardest thing is when you put together a good plan and they don't execute. And that happens all of the time. And that's where you get into the behavioral element that I've really spent about the last 5 or 7 years on. And that is, you know, I think the advancement of the profession of financial planning is going to be much less about financial competency and much more about understanding human behavior, what motivates people to actually act. I think we're following a lot in the lines of, like, the health and fitness area, Lori. So if you think about, like, you know, weight types of things or physical fitness or any kind of nutrition, what they've realized is that people don't need more information. They know what to do. You know, and I can be sarcastic with this. Like, I know that I'm better off eating an apple than I am a Twinkie, right? I don't need someone to tell me that. What I need is something to convince me that I should actually do what's in my best interest. And so we're realizing that education has its limits. We don't need to address every problem by saying, don't you know you should do this? Of course they know they should do that. The problem is, like anything in life that requires discipline, they have to be convinced to do the thing that's in their best interest that isn't necessarily the most fun thing today. And so a lot of it is about realizing who this person is as a unique human. People use things all the time like, I'm not going to save because I've never been good at that. It's like, well, you can either accept that or you can dig into it and realize why you haven't been good at it. What is the barrier? What do you run up against? And a lot of times what you realize is it's emotional deficits that show up that people then try to fill with material types of objects. And so addressing the core issue and being willing to go there, I think has been very helpful for me.
Gotcha. Good one. Okay. So Ashley asks you, you mentioned one of your most memorable college experiences was having mentors. What made them a good, whoops, just lost the screen. What made them a good, valued leader to be looked up to? Any specific characteristics?
Yeah. It's hard to get people out of my mind that you don't know and get into actual attributes. So I've got about 3 faces in front of me, but let me try to describe them. I think the biggest thing that I found is people that were authentic and that were struggling to find their own way. The world is full of people pleasers and people that are trying to do the right thing, but it doesn't really come from their core. Like they're not actually trying to figure out who they are and how to live authentically in that. And so that was the one thing I think that stood out to me when I think of these couple individuals that are in my head, is there was a high degree of authenticity. They weren't trying to cover up their weaknesses. They were humble. They were okay to reveal where they were at and what they were struggling with. And you don't have to have it all together. That's one thing I would encourage, is a humble mentor. If not, you're just going to get a bunch of textbook stuff that you can get without a mentor. That's not real helpful. I think that is a big aspect of it. The other is just having people that are willing to share some space with you. The world's busy, people are busy, they got things to do, and it's hard to actually find someone who's willing to invest that degree of attentionality into your life. And so, part of it's recognizing that person. The other is recognizing who's willing to step into that space. And, I think the answer for me is there's been relatively few. So when you identify them, I think it's a matter of nurturing that relationship, making sure you're trying to give back as much as they're giving you. It's not a competition. But at some point, you've got to be reciprocating in that relationship. I think that's been helpful as well.
Great. So Emily's asking, how specifically is COVID-19 impacting financial planners, and how do you stay sane?
That's good. Well, it's back to the human development, or human dimension. The 2 things that cause people the most problem in life when it comes to money is greed and fear. And both of those are emotions. So anytime you make an emotional financial decision, you can pretty much guarantee you're making the wrong decision. I try to ascribe to the mentality that if you don't know what to do, don't do anything. That's probably the way to work when it comes to money, right? Don't mean to be paralyzed, but what happens in our humanity is, we were created for survival from the very earliest times. And that's why we've been able to be so resilient at times, because we do survive. The problem is a lot of the things that help us survive are very reactionary survival mechanisms, like fear. And fear is a God-given emotion that keeps us out of bad situations. But it also creates a lot of really bad money behaviors where people do just the opposite of what they should be doing. And so I would say the biggest thing, Emily, that I'm doing is a perspective granter. It's trying to give people a perspective into what are we trying to accomplish and how is this event impacting that? Because a lot of people are making decisions that aren't valid at all. They're making big moves in their retirement fund, and they're 48 years old. And it's like, this is ridiculous, because you don't need this money for 20 years, and what's happening in the market is absolutely irrelevant to your situation. However, you have to be much more gentle in sharing that because it's not irrelevant to their situation. They're staying up at night and they're having conflict about it, and they're taking more blood pressure meds. And, it's a real visceral situation where they're experiencing this. But granting perspective says, go ahead and experience this, but don't act on this fear in this way, because the fear or the risk needs to be painted in context of what it actually is. And so I think, taking a breather, getting some perspective. It's also one of those times where you find out how good you are based on the conversations you've had in the past. So I measure situations like this as in, if I'm getting a lot of panic and a lot of calls, I probably haven't done an effective job in the previous times leading up to this to be able to help paint some of these scenarios. Because to grant perspective, I should probably be reflecting on situations, say, remember when we had this conversation about your risk tolerance? Remember when we talked about, would you be okay if the market went down 30%? You said yes. All right, this is that time, right? So I'm going to need you to buckle down, all right? Live true to your word. This is not going to continue this way. And really, it's referencing conversations that have already happened, already taken place. This should not be a surprise, even though, again, the emotion is going to be very real. One of the beauties of times like this, if you look back, all financial behaviors have gotten better after recessions. So if you look at things like savings rates and saving for retirement, if you look at credit balances, they've gone down. You can look at every recession in the past history, and these things have gotten better. The reason is people tend to get much more conservative. It's like a wake-up call. I call it turtle syndrome. People go into their shells when this stuff happens because there's like rocks falling all around them, and they know they're safe in these situations. And so actually it's pretty counterintuitive financially. We experience the panic, but most of the time it's like a recalibration with financial stuff. We get more prudent. We start to cut out variable expenses. You watch how many people cut the cord on things like cable, or will shop around for lower insurance rates, or they'll do all sorts of things right now out of a desperation measure. But then they realize, like, wow, quality of life actually went up based on this. Or they won't go out to eat as much. I mean, unfortunately, that's going to be some of the trend that we experience. People realize they set new patterns of behavior based on a forced thing, and then they realize that quality of relationships have actually gone up. Their account balances have actually gone up. These kinds of things happen. So there is some sunshine amidst the clouds after it blows over a bit.
Nice. Okay. I'm actually going to read you two questions because I think they might have a relationship to each other. So Christine is asking, what experiences prepared you most for being a financial planner? And Alex is asking, Mike Rowe once said, never follow your passion, but always bring it with you. What is your reaction to that statement, and how it might relate to becoming a financial planner? So one is, what experiences prepared you for it? And the other is, how do you bring your passion into it, and how did that statement relate? Okay.
Well, let me answer the second one first, with passion. I think, one of the things I learned from my whole foray into accounting, the short study, and is that you really have to be able, I think when it comes to vocation decisions, you have to answer two questions. And those questions are you good at it? And do you love it? And both of those questions are equally important. My problem was that I was good at accounting, but I didn't like it. I didn't love it. And so I think, to use Alex's word, I didn't have a passion for it. And what that created is just a lot of fatigue. But the opposite works too, or doesn't work, I should say. You can be passionate about something, but if you're not good at it, it's going to become very frustrating for you. That's that limits, right? I loved basketball. I played it all my life. I loved it. And I can hide behind a camera right here, but I'm 5'6", right? And I realized quickly that, when Emily's blocking my shot, that's probably, I probably have no future in this area. And that's true, right? That's the truth. And that's those constraints you rub up against to say, no matter how much passion I have in this area, it isn't going to work. And so I get liberated when I realize that, okay, that's a closed door, but what else is open? Where does passion actually intersect what I'm good at? And those are the spots that I should be focusing in on. And, it was a process for me. I had to go through 3 degrees, and multiple moves, about 4 jobs to find that thing. And so, I do think it's much more about the journey than it is the destination. Every job I've ever had has revealed something about my passion and my skills and my deficits along the way. So, I think for me, it's one of those lessons, Lori. You got this, you can set metrics in life, but there's also this gut feel at times. And when you're living in your sweet spot, you just kind of know it. I think it's probably just joy is the best word to describe it. You don't dread Sunday night. You actually look forward to Monday morning. The danger of it is you're doing work all the time at times because it brings you so much fulfillment and joy. Your personal life and your work world tend to collide in healthy ways. And so that's kind of how I think I would attack the passion question.
Okay.
Can you ask the first one again?
What experiences prepared you the most for being a financial planner?
Well, I can tell you what makes you the best financial planner, and that is being the best listener. And I don't say that in a trite way at all. I mean, it does sound like a textbook answer, but by far the best financials are the best financial planners are the best listeners, because a lot of times what people say is not what they actually intend to say. When it comes to money, it's the most taboo topic that's out there. Probably not among millennials and Gen Zers, but certainly if you talk to our demographic, Lori, I mean, people would rather talk about anything other than money. And so oftentimes you'll get an answer that's like, I don't think that's the real answer, right? Or you'll get something that is kind of surface level. It's like, I think that's identifying something. And so being able to listen and then ask the appropriate questions. So yeah, I think to answer the question, then marriage in relationship is probably the best thing because it comes down to communication. This idea of digging, listening well, being able to ask clarifying questions. I heard you say this, but I also heard this. Can you help explain that? And really kind of directing people to their own solutions. So, it's probably life in general. Relationships, just navigating relationships in a healthy way. And realizing that at the core of every financial planning situation, no matter how much difference there is in bank accounts or jobs or stock options or age, you got a human on the other side of the table. And so understanding humans and what people like and knowing, that they're cared for, that goes a long way.
Good one. Okay. So from Mackenzie, I'm getting a psychology degree right now. I hope to be a lawyer someday. I am very interested in financial planning after hearing you talk about it. Could I perhaps go towards a financial planning job later in life?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. I think there are a lot of people like Mackenzie who, start to get an idea of something that exists that maybe they weren't aware of before. One of the things I recommend for students who are early on in their careers that have the flexibility is the first financial planning course is what we call the Financial Planning for Professionals. It's Finance 250. It's offered in the spring every year. If you've got a chance to be able to take that, that just gives you more of a survey of the financial planning industry and what we're doing. So, if you have a chance for an elective, that may be a good one just to fit in to give you more idea of whether financial planning is for you. But to answer the question more directly, the answer is yes, because there are still many more people that are coming into financial planning in the non-traditional sense, being second, third, fourth career individuals, than there are that are coming through traditional pipeline of higher ed. What has to happen to be a certified finance? So this is interesting, right? When somebody says they're a financial planner or a financial advisor, that doesn't tell me much. I don't know what that is, because there are a whole lot of people that hang themselves out to be financial advisors or financial planners. The big movement has been towards being a certified financial planner. It's much like a certified public accountant. You can do taxes and not be a CPA, but the industry is pretty well adopted that if you want a good tax person, getting a CPA is a good credential in that way. the CFP world is moving to that area. So financial planners are more and more adopting the certified financial planner designation, because the marketplace is starting to ask that question of wanting someone who has a CFP. So in order to get a CFP, you have to do a couple things. They're the 4 E's. The first one is education. So you have to have met certain education requirements in order to sit for the exam. The exam is the second E. So you've got education, you've got exam, you've got experience, which is the working experience, and then you've got ethics. Those are the 4 E's. So what we have here at Fox is we have a program that's registered with the CFP board. What that means is that if students go through our major, they will satisfy the education experience, or excuse me, the education requirement. So when they graduate from our program, they'll be eligible to sit for the exam. You don't have to meet it that way. So if you have a psychology degree and you go to law school and you become an attorney for a while, and then you think, I think I'd like to be a financial planner, or maybe you want to do both, Mackenzie. So, estate planning requires that you're a JD. So you can actually become an attorney and specialize in estate law, and that gets you into the financial planning area, and it's a highly lucrative profession where there aren't many people that are operating in that space. But what you would need to do is you would need to go back and meet that educational requirement. And you can do that in a variety of ways. You can do it based on certification. So if you have a JD, you actually don't have to go back and do the education. That qualifies you. If you have a PhD in business, if you have a CPA, all of those meet the educational requirement. Or you can go back and do one of these certificate programs that are online, and they take about 9 months on the short end to about 18 months on the long end, where you can meet the educational requirement and then sit for the exam. Does that help, or does that confuse it more?
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Question. Okay, Ryan, how do you incorporate your faith into financial planning? And do you ever struggle with clients who place money at the center of their lives?
Yes, that last one's really easy to answer. I would say most people put money at the center of their life. And this is where the values part really comes up. I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I certainly have a passion about it, and I've spent my career trying to figure out what it means to have an appropriate stewardship lens when it comes to money. If I was in class with you all, we'd be talking a lot about deceit, because what money does is money's a false promise, and it holds itself out as meeting a whole bunch of things that it can never meet. So things like, you'll feel more successful if you have more money. No, you won't. You'll feel less lonely if you have more money. No, you won't. Right? All of these things that money promises that it will not deliver on, because you were never intended for money to ever step into that space. It never will. And so, recognizing that and then watching people try to do that is a very painful experience. It's one of the most difficult things that I have. But I can't just come out and say that. Again, I'm a fiduciary as a financial planner. So, I'm working on behalf of the client. And so I can't just say, that's a bad decision because buying that new car is not going to make you feel any better. I can ask some questions that gently help to have this person articulate what that new car purchase is going to do, or that second home, or taking this vacation, or, to try to help them explore that for themselves. But, I think when it comes to values, it's really trying to do it gently. But yeah, it's frustrating at times because people do put money at the center of their life. I think that's why if you look at the Bible and you look at the message of money, we typically focus on tithing, but tithing it's the wrong place to look, because when most people talk about tithing, they're thinking about what's the minimum I have to do to get myself off the hook so I can spend the rest of it. And that's absolutely counter to what the biblical message is. It's all about control. And so what element does money play in your life? What control does it have? And the freedom comes from releasing that and realizing that those things that you most want, think about Maslow's hierarchy, those top rungs will never, ever be accomplished with money. They just can't.
Gotcha. Okay, I've got 2 more questions coming from students. One's from Cody. I'm actually taking an online class called Planning for Financial Security at Retirement, and I've been learning a lot of stuff. What are your thoughts on starting with 10% in your 401k? And in relations to debt, what are your thoughts on 1% ADR? Would you suggest once a debt is paid off, rolling those payments into your next lowest payment?
Those are good questions. I think the danger with with any financial planning advice in a group of 100 is always that, there's a reason it's called personal financial planning. Personal financial planning means it's personal in nature. So this is a workshop, and it's very difficult to answer a question like, should you put 10% in a 401k? Well, what does the rest of your financial situation look like? Do you have an emergency fund? If you don't have an emergency fund, I would say stop putting money in your retirement, because you can't touch that money until you're 59 and a half at the earliest. I work with a lot of people who have 401ks and they have credit card debt at 24%. And that's ridiculous. You'd be much better off paying off that interest rate on the credit card and stop doing that other productive thing until you have that under control. Do you have adequate insurance protection? If you don't, then you could lose all of that money in a heartbeat. So you better make sure that you have adequate insurance protection. You better make sure that you have an emergency fund. Where are you at in life? College students are not at a very secure stage of life. There's a lot of shifting ground trying to figure out, what will the job market look like? Am I going to grad school? Am I going to live at home? What that's going to look like? Am I going to need to find an apartment? Am I going to have roommates, right? All of those questions mean that you probably would like to have as much margin as possible to be able to work with. And so, believe it or not, a lot of times with students, I'm actually trying to counsel them out of investing unless there's special situations, and there are some. And so your question may come from a special situation where somebody does have those needs met. And by all means, if you do, then the best thing you can do is start investing early, because the time value of money is going to work on your side, and you're going to be able to do some incredible things that you couldn't otherwise. But then you get into questions too, or not to clutter this up, but things like, a 401k comes through an employer. So is the employer matching any of that money? If they are, then that's free money, and I would encourage you to take free money. That's kind of a good mantra in life, as long as it's ethical. Take it. If not, then you're probably better off to open up a Roth IRA and do it that way, because as a younger person, you've got tremendous tax advantages that happen in a Roth IRA that don't happen in a 401k. So, we start to get into some pretty complicated situations, and I don't want to confuse. But those are some of the things that I would be thinking about as far as the investment. Are there other things that you could be doing that would have a greater opportunity? And what are the other investing options that are before you that may be better or may not be better than that 401k option, depending on what your employer is doing? What was the next question? Was it about snowball?
In relation to debt, what are your thoughts on a 1% ADR? And would you suggest once a debt is paid off, rolling those payments into the next lowest payment?
Yeah, I think this is one that gets a little tough too, because Dave Ramsey and I have different philosophies on a lot of things, actually. But when it comes to debt, his advice is prudent. The problem is it's trying to hit the middle of the bullseye when there are a lot of people that aren't in the middle of the bullseye. I think that credit can be used extremely well, and it can be done in a way that's actually embodying more stewardship and wisdom than avoiding debt in general, depending on what you're doing with it. When it comes to debt and payback, if you've read Financial Peace, or if you're familiar with it, he uses this debt snowball idea. And the idea is to pay off the smallest balance first and then go on to the next one. Well, financially, that's not the best thing to do. Financially, the best thing to do is to pay off the highest interest rate debt and keep doing that and paying it off that way. But what he's appealing to is the fact that not a lot of people have discipline. And so what they need motivation, and motivation happens by hitting softballs before you hit curveballs, right? And so go ahead and set a softball on a tee and hit it. And that is, paying the lowest balance first. If you can pay that lowest balance, then it motivates you. You see the value of, being able to kind of deprive yourself of some of the things you want now to be able to make success happen. And I understand that. But for other people that may be more disciplined, paying back the highest interest rate would be the best thing to be able to do. So those are some of the differences that I would have there. But I think a lot of it depends on your personality and your style, what's worked for you in the past. To be quite honest, we're talking about dollars. So, even if it's a couple $100 difference, it's better to pay it. And so anything you can do that will motivate you to be able to pay off that debt, the better off you're going to be, particularly when it comes to consumer debt. But Lori, does get into harder decisions when you talk about something like student loan debt when you graduate. If that student loan debt's at 4 or 5%, that's a lot lower interest rate than a 24% credit card. So you're also getting an interest deduction on your taxes. And so as long as you can sleep at night and you've got quality relationships, how do you deal with debt? If it's causing a bunch of stress, then I would say pay it off regardless of how much financial benefit there would be to keeping it, because there's no amount of financial benefit that's better than your overall well-being or the relational well-being in your life. So a long-winded answer that I'm not sure answered anything directly.
Oh, that's good. No, that's good. And also you've got to look at what your savings is bringing in, right? So if you have money invested and you're making 7% on that money, a 4% loan doesn't hurt as bad. So
yeah, I mean, the biggest difficulty with retirement accounts for a 20-year-old is that you can't touch that money for 40 years. So you have to be willing to part with that money knowing you're not going to need it for 40 years. If that's the case, then by all means do it. But a lot of us can't do that without, having some risk that we are going to need the money because we're going to need to put a deposit down on an apartment in 2 years that we didn't expect right now.
Right. Okay, Nicole, our last question here from Nicole is, how would you define a healthy colliding of professional life and personal life? I love that.
Well, I don't think it's this elusive work-life balance. People talk about that all the time, but I have found that that's a misnomer, and it's actually something that is impractical most of the time. I like to think about it more in the lines of seasons. We go through our lives much like the planet goes through seasons, and that is there are going to be seasons where you're going to work hard and you are going to be out of whack for a period of time. And you are going to experience human emotion, like you're going to be fatigued, and you're going to give up some time with loved ones. And, you have to experience what that does. Like, are you able to communicate during that? And, does that create divides? Certainly it's not worth it if that's what's happening. But there are going to be more barren, cold times where you're just head down, you're working, you're traveling more than you want to, you're doing things. But you can't live there forever. The season has to change. And so then you're going to experience a different season. And, there will be summer seasons as well, where much like today, maybe, you're sitting on the back porch, drinking some tea and enjoying some sunshine. That has to happen metaphorically in your life at times. In order to have that work. So, I think that has to be the case. There has to be some seasonality to your life where you're experiencing ebbs and flows of ups and downs. I think the other thing is you have to be very consistent. Like I have found that bifurcating the two is not a very good place for me to live. And that is being able to distinguish when I'm job oriented and when I'm life oriented. Certainly time is important to do that, but I think you've got to be more integrated as a human than that. You've got to be able to, be somebody who is at home, but happens to, have to take a work phone call from time to time, just because that's the nature. And who you are at work is who you are at home. You've also got to have good communication and good accountability in your life, so people can call you on certain things like, hey, you seem to be a little stressed, or you seem to be working a little more than you have in the past, or, hey, I haven't seen you much. These kind of things that keep us accountable to that. But it's been a journey for me, Lori, and I think that's one of the biggest things is to just try to, you don't want to live life always by feel, but you do want to trust that you've got people in your life and you've got a structure that can hold you accountable when you're out of whack, and really be able to trust those God-given emotions that, if you're not sleeping at night, there's probably an issue. Some things, I work with this with people, if they're if they're going to sleep or they're staying up thinking about their investments, something's wrong. Like, I haven't done my job. Life isn't worth staying up at night and worrying about. Yes, we're going to have concerns and we're going to have stress in life. And, certainly now is one of those times that we shouldn't be benchmarking everything off of. But a lot of it is about paying attention to those kinds of things that show up that I think is a revealing of maybe something that's out of balance a bit. The other thing is to make sure that your spouse is on board with this, with whatever you're doing. I think having home harmony is really important, and making sure that you don't bring your work home and you've got this home office, but you are able to integrate this into your life, and everybody's kind of on the same page as far as taking these different topics and hours of the day and putting them together.
Got it. Well, Ryan, I can't thank you enough. We're essentially at our time, but I would love for you to just take 1 or 2 minutes and just give us this summary that, if there's just 1 or 2 things you would like to make sure everybody walks away with, what would that be? What are your key messages from today?
Well, there's maybe a one that comes to the surface right off the bat, and it may be a little more self-interested, but I think that is, if there was anything in today's talk that like McKinsey or others that maybe identified something that tickled you, that you would follow up and either dropping me a line, having a conversation and talking more about it, or maybe registering for that 250 course in the spring and seeing where things go. But at least exploring it and giving it an opportunity if that's something that is of interest. But I think the biggest thing for me comes back to goals, Lori, and it's the idea that life and what we make of it is typically a series of goals. I pretty much believe in the power of humanity and what God created us to be able to do, which is some remarkable, amazing things. Just look around you. In the midst of this crisis, what's actually happening? How in the world a GM plant goes from a car manufacturer to a ventilator facility in 7 days? That is freaking ridiculous. Like, the ability of people to adapt and do certain things is incredible. So, I like to think about the power of goals. The fact that, I often say you rarely ever accomplish a goal without intentionality. If you're not setting a goal and going after it, it most likely is not going to happen. Because there are too many other distractions, things that will happen. But I also say you almost always accomplish a realistic goal with intentionality. And hopefully that's empowering, but it's also a little frightening, because you got to make sure that your goals are the ones that are worthy of pursuit. And so if I guess I would distill it down to make goals, but make sure you're choosing the right goal and then go after it. And that really, to me, extends into whether you're talking about finishing a semester like this in a circus of an environment. Same thing. What are the goals? Are they the right ones? And go after it. But the same thing when it comes to relationships and major choices and career choices and, what's on your to-do list for any given day or week.
Gotcha. That's perfect. All right. So Ryan, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for coming to our classroom. I'm sure they appreciated it. And I'm going to just remind everybody that it's an incredible career and it's not going anywhere. As we've got our large baby boomer audience settled in, nestling into their retirement, you've got this next massive audience of millennials. They're going to want to know how to, what to do with their money. It's a great career and it's a well-paying career. So something you certainly can think of now or in the future, right?
Thanks, Lori. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.